A new poll commissioned by CBC News indicates a potential shift in separatism sentiment among Albertans. It shows an increase in attachment to Canada from 5 years ago.
Like the proportion of Albertans who say they feel more attached to Alberta than Canada has been relatively stable. But what we've seen is an increase in the proportion of Albertans who feel more attached to Canada.
Now, the poll sampled 1,200 people across the province. 34% now say they feel more attached to their country than to Alberta. That's up from just 20% 5 years ago. When it comes to the question of whether Alberta would be better off if it's separated, 67% disagreed, while 30% agreed. Those results largely mirror a poll that asked the same question in May 2020. So now, for more on all of this, we've reached Janet Brown in Calgary. She's a pollster and political commentator who conducted that poll for CBC News. Janet, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, so this poll has found that Albertans' attachment, to Canada has grown. Were you surprised by the results here?
Well, I was surprised by the results, but in hindsight, you have to think about when the poll was done. We went into field after the federal election, where there was sort of so much focus on national issues, after Trump started making his 51st state threat. So when you look at the numbers through those lenses, in a way, it wasn't surprised that, Canadians are starting to entrench, and Albertans as well are starting to entrench and feeling more Canadian. We certainly see, Canadians are less likely to cross the border and that sort of thing. So initially, I was surprised, but then I thought in the context of what's going on today, that kind of makes sense.
Now, your findings do also reveal that Alberta separatism is no longer this fringe idea, but rather a really strong sentiment. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, we also have 5 years of tracking on that question as well. In the current survey, we've got 30% of people that are saying that they think Alberta would be better off if it's separated. And we have had similar numbers over the past 5 years. So we're not really seeing the proportion of Albertans who support separatism growing, but what we are seeing are the people who strongly agree with that notion growing. We now have 17% of people strongly agreeing that Alberta would be better off if it's separated. So, 30% is not a majority, but neither is it a number that you can scoff at and just disregard. This is a big segment of society that feels this way. And in certain pockets of the province, it's a majority view. For instance, people who voted for the Conservatives in the past federal election, people who would vote for the United Conservatives in an upcoming provincial election, half of those people have separatist sentiments. So, it's not a fringe issue here in Alberta.
And when we talk about the party lines provincially as well, how do we see the movement shaking down or support for it shaking down when you compare UCP voters versus NDP voters?
Well, it's interesting. We're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of the last Alberta provincial election. And our polling shows that Danielle Smith has really maintained the coalition of voters that allowed her to win the election 2 years ago. She's got 52% of support. Support for the NDP has somewhat softened under the new leader, Naheed Nenshi. He's got some work to do to really establish himself. But it's quite remarkable to see Danielle Smith enjoy the kind of honeymoon that she's had. Here in Alberta, we haven't seen a politician with a honeymoon like this since the Ralph Klein days. So she's popular. One of the things that's making her popular is the demands that she's trying to make of Ottawa to get a new deal. And, that's really how it breaks down. NDP supporters, they're against separatism. UCP supporters, their views are more nuanced. Some of them want to separate. Some of them just want a different deal with Ottawa.
And how does the U.S. president factor into all of this? I know you touched on it off the top, but we know that it played a role in the federal election. What about the support within the province, not just for these specific parties, but for the idea of separating?
Well, one of the questions we ask people is just how stressful they find trade negotiations between Canada and the U.S. And Albertans are pretty split on how stressful that is. What's interesting, though, is the people who are very stressed out about trade issues, they're the ones who are highly opposed to separatism. The ones who like the idea of separatism, they're not very bothered by Donald Trump. And I think that really comes down to the fact that Albertans with separatist sentiments they think Ottawa is the problem. They don't think Donald Trump is the problem. So, one of the things that is coming out throughout this entire poll is the idea of polarization. And, and one of the polarities is, people who are really focused on the US versus people who are really focused on Alberta's relationship with the rest of Canada.
And finally, Janet, in the last 30 seconds I have with you, what did the polling show about how Albertans would vote if a separation referendum was held today?
So we asked the question if they thought Alberta would be better off or not. That was 30%. Then we asked them very directly if a referendum were held today, and 28% said that they would vote for separation today. So almost the same number. And as I said before, it's not a majority, but neither is it a fringe element either.
Janet, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
That is Janet Brown. She is a pollster and political commentator.